Hey everybody, thanks for listening. This is my second full-length feature episode. You're getting the free first hour here if you're listening to this one. This will be up on all of my podcast hosting sites, but if you're interested in checking out the full 2-hour episode, please go to theshiftnow.com and click on that subscribe button. I'm offering $6 a month memberships. You get the full feature-length episodes, plus you get to be added into the membership forum. I've started a really neat community for the membership. It's almost like its own social media app where we can get together and we can have conversations about particular topics, what's going on in the world today. You can get involved with having discussions with me about the direction that you want to see the show going. If you have ideas for people that I can interview, they will be welcome there. So I hope you think about checking it out. In the meantime, enjoy this first hour of my interview with Marayam, Henien. She is the purveyor of honeycolony.com, and she produced and directed the documentary The Vanishing of the Bees. There's a lot of great parallels in this conversation between what's going on right now with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and what has been happening with the bees in terms of this colony collapse disorder. In that what we are discovering is that the bees have been affected by a low-level poisoning that then over a long period of time develop autoimmune disorders and other issues that eventually lead to colony collapse. I think, unfortunately, there may be a parallel between human civilizations right now, where many of us are exposed to low-level toxins on a daily basis, and over time, this starts to develop into these autoimmune disorders that we're seeing in our communities, in our nations all across the world, as well as cancers and other issues that may be created out of this low-level toxicity. Our body's trying to deal with this over long periods of time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, think about becoming a member at www.theshiftnow.com. You can also check out my Patreon page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. All right, enjoy. Good morning, noon, and night, whenever and wherever you're listening to The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. This is episode 42 of The Shift. If you like what you're listening to, please think about becoming a member. You can subscribe at www.theshiftnow.com. Go to my Patreon page at The Shift with Doug McKenty. I'm on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty and on Twitter at DMcKenty, so you can check that out. My guest on the program today is Marayam Henien, investigative journalist, documentary filmmaker, and the founder and editor-in-chief of honeycolony.com, an online health and wellness resource for those seeking non-toxic, organically sourced healthcare products and modalities. Marayam also works as a functional medicine coach and consultant through the website. After initially working as an investigative journalist for a variety of mainstream media outlets, Marayam broke out into the world of independent documentary production by directing the film The Vanishing of the Bees, describing the phenomenon of colony collapse disorder and the mysteries surrounding it. The documentary follows two professional beekeepers as they seek to understand this phenomenon of CCD from 2006, when a large percentage of bees began to disappear, to 2010. This heart-wrenching story reveals corporate corruption as scientists in Europe finally reveal the source of the disaster to be a systemic pesticide manufactured by Bayer Corporation. The story ends with the beekeepers frustrated by the Environmental Protection Agency, mired in bureaucratic red tape and corporate regulatory capture, reacting slowly to the crisis. In contrast, Marayam describes an alternative to the corporate food production model, which depends upon large-scale monocropping and toxic pesticides, with a decentralized organic model characterized by diversity of crops and non-toxic pesticide applications, where each farm maintains its own colony of pollinators to ensure maximum food production. In this way, Marayam creates a metaphor for the human condition. Are human populations suffering from colony collapse, slowly poisoned to death by toxic chemicals released into the environment through corporate malfeasance? This metaphor applies to Marayam's work to this day at honeycolony.com, offering organic, non-toxic health solutions in order to maintain a happy, healthy, and safe human colony. Welcome, Marayam Henien, to the show, and thanks for helping to make the shift. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Doug. I'm happy to help people make the shift.
Right? It needs to be done.
It's happening.
Right? Yeah, I think so. I try to stay positive. I got a little depressed yesterday watching your documentary just because it was so frustrating to see how the scientists in Europe had really already dealt with the issue, and then it took so long for the United States to catch up. But let's get into that a little bit later. First, I just want to get a little bit of your history. I know you started as an investigative journalist working for the mainstream media, so I kind of wanted to understand your experience through that and then into your more independent work that you're doing now.
Yeah, it's good to remind myself, like I've had so many lifetimes and I've been at this for a really long time, and I believe that I'm a visionary and that I've been ahead of the curve and now people are catching up, and it's really frustrating when you have an assault on your person and an assault on your company when you really actually are the real thing and care about people's health and want to empower them. And I feel that the film is still my film is quite it's been there for a while, but it's still applicable because we really are the bees. And with this whole connu virus, COVID-19 pandemic exaggeration, this is an opportunity for us to really wake up, and I really do see a shift happening, and we're gonna reach that tipping point of truth. Sorry.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think really prevents people from being able to make that shift in perspective is this serious trust that they have of the mainstream media and the mainstream narrative that comes across. One thing I really wanted to talk about, something I've been noticing lately, especially, is that I'm reading a lot of articles and I'm realizing that many mainstream journalists, I believe they're given a narrative, and then they go out into the world and they find the facts that conform. It's a form of confirmation bias, right? I mean, they're told by their editors, make this story, and then they go out into the world, they find whatever facts they can to make the story and make it fit into the narrative, as opposed to, I think, what maybe people like you and I try to do, which is look at the facts and then create a narrative based on the facts. Have you seen this?
Yes. I think even if when we look at the pressers, that I think a lot of the questions are prompted in a lot of the interviews with Bill Gates. It's like the interview with Ellen, like she was fed the lines, like, oh, what a great question you ask, Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of prompting. We're seeing a lot of lying, and I've said before, like referencing Hoaxed and Mike Cernovich saying that fake news is old news, and certainly we learn about yellow journalism when we're getting our degree, and there's principles that are not being followed, and I call them prostitutes, and like Trump says, it's lame street media, and it's really disappointing. It's disappointing that now, as a real journalist, I have a faux journalists writing smear pieces about me, and I've broken a lot of stories in mini stories regarding this coronavirus, and it gets buried. And I'm certainly not doing this for the money, but I do appreciate credit, and I do appreciate breaking stories. Like, who knows that Marayam Henien has found a few lawsuits against Dr. Anthony Fauci. Actually, one that he filed and one that is filed against him. Certainly, I've been talking about the tests. I've been talking about the nursing homes, the hospitals actually making calls. If I was in America, I would have visited physically. And you have to wonder, why is Marayam, how did she know to be in Costa Rica?
Mm-hmm.
So I trusted my higher self. Like someone said that I'm working with Bill Gates, and how is it that you knew to leave? And here there is a lockdown in the jungle. Yesterday we trespassed and went to the beach for the first time. We literally, because we're in such a remote place, but we also have fiber optics, so we really had not left the house in 60 days.
Yeah.
So you, and I bring that up because coming to Costa Rica and seeing how they're following the narrative, and you're learning how to lavos los manos in Spanish, you realize that this is really a global effort.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this before, my mom, I use my mom as an example of saying, like, Mary, how can the whole world be lying? I know it's a crazy huge red pill to swallow, but it's the truth. And so I brought up hoax because he brings up the point, Mike Cernovich in his doc, that because of social media and citizen journalists, we have seen the disparity between the MSM, the mainstream media, and the social media platforms. It's just very unfortunate that as every day goes by, the censorship is accelerating. And
Mm-hmm.
so but that's also serving to wake us up, because I've been writing about techno-fascism and experiencing it for, since 2016, and started writing about it in 2019. But until it happens to you, and I was defending Alex Jones and Roseanne Barr, regardless of what you think of them, doesn't mean I'm a fan, but I am a fan of freedom of speech. And I am also not one to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm also all for using discernment. Like, what's happened to our intuition? Can't we look at a Roseanne Barr and see that she's no more of a racist than you or I, and that she's genuine?
Right. Well, it is interesting the way that there's a lot of mud that gets slung and a lot of ad hominem attacks in situations where maybe we should at least be having rational conversations. I mean, it's certainly challenging when you come up with, excuse me, any kind of assertion. I think one of the most recent ones is the CDC just came out in the last couple of days with this 0.26 infection mortality rate for COVID. And then there were those of us who've been saying, well, it's probably, about zero point 0.1 to 0.2 forever and ever. And yet, are people going to be able to go, hey, how were they correct? How did they know from the beginning when the CDC was trying to push this as a 3.4% death rate for this disease? And it is through the manipulation of the mainstream media that they're able to pass off a lot of this misinformation. So if you're not double checking their statistics yourself, you're going to get misinformed. And that is,
exactly.
It's just fascinating. And I even understand why people question, well, if I'm getting 50 articles a day saying one thing, then how is your point of view going to be right when it's different from that? How do you think the corporate media, in your experience, has the ability to mainline these narratives and then pump them out to where hundreds of articles saying the same thing get pushed in the same day?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and it's one that I'm writing about. I'm putting together COVID Coronavirus Chronicles, which is going to be a very thorough timeline. And because it's a fast moving train and an infodemic,
Mm-hmm.
it's like hey, if you were too busy buying toilet paper or washing your hands for this play by play, tune in to this Chronicles and go along, suspend your beliefs, and go along on a journey with me. Consider that 6 corporations control 90% of the channels out there, for
Right.
one, and that is how they're able to control the message. And journalists are arguably dissuaded or brainwashed. And I was saying yesterday, as I considered myself a liberal. I mean, I considered myself, if I was going to choose a party, not that I was political for a long time. I was kind of just like a backseat and definitely getting news, but like watching Bill Maher and getting my news from there, never succumbing to the hate towards Trump. And if anything, it's the hate from the Democrats or the liberals or the leftists or whatever you want to call them that are pushing people away. I'm disgusted by the smears. And so, how does someone navigate an infodemic? How does someone believe, like, how could this be pulled off if all of these supposed respected channels are disseminating falsehoods? It's hard to believe that, but we have seen CBS, for instance, peddle false footage, not once but twice. We know that they are deep in the pockets of big pharma. They are prostitutes for them. So I hope, I mean, every day it's like I had a power outage for 15 hours and I was experiencing coronavirus FOMO of wanting to be on the cutting edge. But it was like, okay, 15 hours later, just joking, is this over yet? Is this still sham going on? And the CDC, Fauci stated that this is as dangerous as the flu. And there certainly have been so much mixed information from the WHO, from the CDC. And like you stated, like, how does someone keep up if there's misinformation? That's the point, right? That we cannot discern between truth and fiction. And then we, the journalists or the truthers that are putting these puzzle pieces together, then we're damned if we accidentally, and I've been guilty of this, put some footage or put an article that we later find out is wrong. But we're doing our best, and then we can say, like, I'm sorry, I untweeted that, or this was found to be BS. Because we're also we're being exposed to micro trauma on a daily basis, whether we realize it or not. And for us who are the truthers that are spending every waking moment trying to digest information, I think many of us are exhausted and we don't realize the impact that it's had on us. I was speaking to Vivian Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick's daughter, and she also is just like waking up, eating, going to the bathroom, and just all day doing research. And many of us are, to try to wake others up and for us to understand what is really going on.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And like you mentioned, they use the left-right paradigm so well to get people to take sides and then not just follow really the evidence or the science or just figuring out the numbers. And one of the things I think is most frustrating for me is that because Donald Trump came out with the potential hydroxychloroquine solution, then everybody on the left automatically says, oh, that's a bunch of bunk. When there are actually treatment protocols that could be saving people. I mean, I think if you take a lot of the different information into account here in terms of had we protected the elders and the nursing homes and had we been using these treatment protocols that are working instead of the antivirals and the ventilators, we really could have minimized a huge amount of the damage that's being done here. And yet the corporate media won't report and aren't reporting accurately on the testing numbers, the statistics, the potential treatments, and then reporting the statistics in such a confusing way that you can't even interpret, how what is the actual death rate? Are people using a antibody test or a PCR test? This is something that they just sort of gloss over all the time. That, oh, just testing's being done. Testing. Well, what kind of testing and how good is it?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what you've said. Let's take a step back. This story should be over once you realize that the predictive models that were funded by Bill Gates at Imperial College and other predictive models are wrong. And those really set off the trajectory. Also, when you're creating a predictive model, if you don't know patient 0, if you don't know the actual date, then that also skewers the data. So it was projected that 2.1, 2.2 million people were going to die. So the predictive models are wrong. End of story. The tests, the PCR tests are faulty. They're not a diagnostic tool. Test the tests, test the tests. We've been saying this over and over and over and over and over again. I've certainly been saying it as early as February on that notion. That's also end of story. If you know that Carrie Mullis, Celia Farber, who covered the whole debacle with HIV and AIDS and interviewed Carrie Mullis, who himself was embarrassed that this is being used as a diagnostic tool. And this is all under emergency authorization use. Nothing is FDA approved. So why isn't it the end of the story then? New York Times a couple of days ago, their cover story was like 100,000 deaths. They continue with their fear porn.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at the hydrochloroquine from functional medicine perspective. Yes, it's been around for a long time. It's generic, so big pharma doesn't make money when there's 200 brands. I think that we need to look at things on a case by case basis, and people who have shamed me or shamed others, like, oh, how dare you, those two people that died that I know from coronavirus. Okay, I want to see how old they are. I want to see what conditions they had prior. I want to see what they were given in the hospital, and I want to see if they were put on a ventilator, so on and so forth, especially when you know that the doctors, the morticians are being prompted, encouraged to classify everything under the sun as coronavirus. So why isn't the story end there? No, the sham continues. I did an excellent interview with John Rappaport, who's been covering epidemic after epidemic and
Right.
showing the similarities. I just tweeted a cover from Time Magazine, again, about the masks, about the fear, on and on. Except this is everyone's virus. This has no borders. It's magnificent what they've pulled off. Okay, so back to just HCQ, hydrochloroquine. That there are other, in reality, quinine, quercetin, other ways to help basically with the exosomes or clean the cells, because really if you distill it, you're experiencing a mitochondrial dysfunction. You're not getting enough oxygen. I'm not one for the Z-Pack because I would take a culture for the person. Again, I'm not a doctor. But I know more than doctors. I'm going to just say that. That's true. I don't have a lab coat or an MD near my name. And I could get arrested because I'm not a doctor giving. But I would do a swab and I would not give a broad spectrum antibiotic. And HCQ I would look because it can cause arrhythmia. It can cause heart issues. The ventilators, that's just abomination of putting people on ventilators and buying all these ventilators and bypassing oxygen and cannula to get $39,000. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Disgusting.
The ventilator narrative is outrageous to me because they started it right away. Oh my God, we're not going to have enough ventilators. We need all these ventilators, like you're talking about fear porn. And then as the situation progresses, well, I mean, the headlines just a few weeks ago, 88% of people in New York go on ventilators or dying. So that's not working.
Cuomo said it.
Right.
Cuomo said it himself. I
Yeah.
have it. I caught it, saying that it's likened to the final nail in a coffin.
Right.
And then as far as your nursing homes, why is it? Let's say I'll give you an example in Washington, which is home of Bill Gates, which is where patient one was in America, supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the returning visitors, 746 from Wuhan. I called the health department of Washington, on record confirmed that all the infected were associated with Wuhan and returning. Okay? Then, oops, we may have overlooked someone that patient zero was in contact. Supposedly they contact traced or quarantined 60 people. Then we hear about this community spread, yet, another term that we're introduced to early on. Why is it that there's community spread in homeless shelters, nursing homes, prisons, and Indian reservations? Could it be that something else is going on there? These are petri dishes of infection. They have aircon systems. You're going to tell me that you didn't have enough tests, but you managed to test prisoners that you don't give a crap about, that you feed crappy food, and then you're releasing prisoners? Huh? Then you're
Right.
telling prisoners that they have coronavirus. Could you imagine what's ensuing as far as internal chaos within the prisons? So something's fishy with all these nursing homes. I called nursing homes in Quebec because Quebec's having a big problem. I'm from Quebec. Nursing homes in New Jersey, nursing homes in New York. They hung up on me or they told me they couldn't speak to me. No one has the balls to speak. To be honest, this is the time, folks, to come forth for humanity's sake, to dispel these lies. So, I don't know, Doug, there's something off for me with these nursing homes.
Right.
I would go as far as to say there is a culling. People are dying. Whether it's of coronavirus is under question. Not disputing that. These are low-hanging fruit. And then you spoke about the antibodies. So they've turned antibodies on their head, where it used to be a good thing to have antibodies. It showed immunity. And now they're spreading that, ooh, the asymptomatic might be dangerous. You might get reinfected. I am not saying that there's no virus. I've interviewed people that say that. I, as a journalist, I'm always looking under all the rocks. I'm here to give you information and to provoke you to think, hopefully, for yourself and to wake you up from this matrix. I do think there might be a virus. That there might be several strains. They do mutate. And nonetheless, I don't think a vaccine is the answer. Definitely not an experimental RNA, DNA vaccine that's never been tested. And while they say that we are the ones who suffer from vaccine hesitancy, a condition that doesn't even exist, we can argue that they suffer, because I did a little parody, from vaccine vitriol and mania disorder, because they're obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, what's frustrating to me is this notion that what you can do for yourself in terms of prophylactically for your own health is something that has to be done by everyone else. Like, I mean, personal health choice, like health sovereignty for each individual is really got to be, yeah, it's got to be considered a sacred right. If you live in a society that says, oh no, you know, health choices are community based and the community decides what's best, and so everybody has to do what the community says, it's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's also the excuse that eugenicists have always used to do what you're talking about, to cull certain parts of the population. I mean,
Yeah. You know, I enrolled, was one of the first to enroll in the contact tracing program. I went online, I spread the buzz, I told people to
right.
join, not to be a snitch, but I minored in psychology and I look at everything from a psychological point of view to understand the inner machinations and to also have empathy from the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting how, for instance, they're altering the definition of autonomy. Okay? That under the guise, again, of coronavirus, if you're putting people in danger, and have this whiny voice woman who is so annoying telling you that autonomy doesn't mean what it means under the guise of coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is all under emergency use and it's all under the guise of public safety. And so you are putting yourself in danger. And now we're looking, I'm also doing like a, series on masks or muzzles. What is it? At first, when I heard Dr. Judy Mikovits say that masks could be dangerous, we were scratching our heads and wondering, where is this coming from? Now, weeks later, we have Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, who's a rock star. We have Dr. Blaylock explaining. The doctor that sued Fauci that I spoke to also said, one, there's the micron size, there's biofilm that recirculate, you're rebreathing these viral particles. Sure, there's a placebo effect. I was wearing, I'll show you. Like, did I show you this last time?
Oh, wow, no.
This is gas, but this is not for coronavirus.
Right.
This was something I bought in December for when I came to the jungle, because there's usually so much diesel and I have multiple chemical sensitivities, and for the aerotoxic fumes, the organophosphates on landing and takeoff in the plane. Now, I could never wear this because I would scare the hell out of people.
Right.
Maybe now I can. I still don't know. The masks, in any case, you're going to go to the airports. You have to take it off to show your passport. You're touching your face. It's all detrator, which is it's like I've created a new word because I can't say the R word anymore because they've vaporized it. So it's backwards. You can decode what detrator means. It's all doesn't make sense. It's crazy. And now we have people fighting in grocery stores, not in a very evolved, mature way. And like you said, we are engaging for a long time now, a couple of years, in these ad hominem attacks, in these vitriolic, and there's people who are, the real virus is fear and hate.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there seems to be this very one-sided nature in the discourse, and this has been pushed on us, I think. I mean, definitely by corporate media, which is that one side is scientific and the other side is misinformation or fake news. And then you look at the science, and at the very least, science is not always just so monolithic. Like, guess what? There's different scientists that have disagreements. So can we not have disagreements without calling the other side insane or crazy or fake? It's just like, what's going on there? It's so bizarre to be caught up in, a community where political discourse has been reduced to this kind of name calling.
Absolutely. It's below us and it's divisive, which is what they want. And I refuse to be used as a pawn. I stand for peace. I stand for mediation. And it's really scientism. And I've written about the faux faith of modern science for a magazine and for Honey Colony at length. And I saw this while I was making Vanishing of the Bees, and I saw that the EPA does not conduct any independent studies, and it's the fox guarding the hen house.
Right.
And then also, when you do these studies, is anyone really looking at how many days, the parameters, who funded the studies? Is anyone looking at details anymore?
Right.
No. We live in the age of mediocrity. We do not look at details. I'm all about the details. Virgo rising. I get lost in the minutia, but I can also look macro and do both. And I really welcome people to look, invite people to look, please, at the details, to look at the corruption and these conflicts of interest, these revolving doors. So there is now an operation. This is another story that I'm breaking because I'm living it, often Hunter S. Thompson style, while I'm writing something and I'm living through it. And many of us are being attacked by the FDA, by a subgroup called, the acronym is CEDAR, SDER, and they're coming after people who are selling vitamin C, who are selling silver, who are selling vitamins, all under the guise of coronavirus, and saying that, so check it, the operation is called Operation Quack Hack.
Right.
So people thought, because I did a story that's unpublished because I'm trying to find the time to rewrite it. It was more like a blog where it was for my lawyer because I'm being attacked and putting things in perspective. And they thought that Operation Quack Hack was the name that I gave it, not the real name that the FDA
gave.
Right. That is their operation. It's called Quack Hack. We are the quacks when they are, because it's all about inverted truths and projections.
Yeah.
And switching. It's a very easy guideline. You take the script of truth and you reverse it, and then you write something and you put it out there. So they're also stating that they can hack you under certain conditions, again, under the guise of public safety. So a silver seller for 23 years, not a colleague, but someone else that I came across in my research, woke up one morning recently, like 2 weeks ago or so, and they were cut at the server level. They killed their website at the server level. That is a hack that they are justifying to, again, for the betterment of people. Silver folks, there's tons of studies. I just had an interview. Conducted an interview with a PhD patent who makes my 4,000 ppm silver, and they've swept it under the proverbial rug with the introduction of penicillin and other antibiotics. We have an antibiotic resistance epidemic raging that I've been covering for a decade. And now they want to arguably own silver, just like they did with CBD.
Sure.
With, I'm still looking into it, but this is what we're up against. Like me, a truther, really actually care about people and want to empower them, have reversed autoimmune condition, lupus and fibro, and have used silver and been off of antibiotics, and I'm being attacked. So like a honeybee, I need support because I'm standing for people, for their health, for their freedom, for their medical freedom, for their ability to choose, like you said, and for sovereignty. And now we're arguably the whole world that they're trying to control and suppress. And I wonder if it's an alien invasion, really. It's not human.
Well, it's so strange that these controlling influencers are just, they're so driven to control the entire markets, to make everyone think the way that they think. It's not okay to think differently. It's not okay to make different health choices for yourself. It's just outrageous. And I really like, that you bring up this psychology, not even metaphor, but psychological analysis of the whole thing, because I'm feeling the same way. It's anxiety inducing when you do the research, you come to conclusions, and then people just say, oh no, you're just a crazy person. Well, can you engage in the conversation? Here's my evidence. And it's not even happening. They're not paying attention. I've had instances where people just wouldn't even read the articles that I sent them because they were from independent sources and not corporate sources. And it's like, wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Well, one guy that a local journalist that I tried to engage, what's wrong with this source? What's wrong with that source? And it was a few years ago. And he would go on Prop or Not, if you remember that. No. This website Propernaut was put forth right when the Russiagate thing got started. It was Russian propaganda, and it was a list of Russian propaganda sites, theoretically. I believe then James Corbett looked into it and discovered it was funded by the Atlantic Council, which is where a lot of the Russiagate quote-unquote information came from. And then they started going after the fake news sites. They basically started to be... They're the organization that does a lot of delineating, these corporate sites are real news and these independently funded sites are fake news. And I would send him the articles and he wouldn't even read them. Oh, it's not, I'll only read the New York Times or the Washington Post because they've won awards, and he wouldn't look at the articles that I sent him and then go, no, I don't, the source material for these isn't accurate. Just a conversation. It was clearly a kind of a confirmation bias, or the other term that they throw out, cognitive dissonance, right? When they cannot see the evidence that's right in front of their face, because it would have to require a paradigm shift for them to be able to put the evidence together in the logical way. And I see that a lot. And then they do project it onto us, what they're doing. Oh, you must have confirmation bias. Well, I don't think so. I've read both sides of the argument and I've made my choice. And these people won't, pay attention to my side of the argument. They can't look at it. They can't see it.
I think that's huge, Doug, the cognitive dissonance, having to reconfigure your whole brain.
Right.
And I'm sorry, because when you realize the depth of the evil, it's disturbing and it's hard to believe. And that's why I've reached the point. First of all, it's the wild, wild west. Really, anything is possible. If someone told me these people are not human, these globalists, they're part alien, and this is a takeover, I'm sorry, I would believe it. You want to think I'm crazy? Fine. That's fine. I don't, even all the smear pieces, it's okay. I know who I am. I
Right.
know my work speaks for itself. I know it's really hella hard to make a documentary and have it shown all around the world and win awards and get a celebrity to narrate it. And it's not, you don't do it for the money. And we are really the bees slowly being poisoned by sublethal doses. And I'm writing that in the chronicles too, that it's just, and then there's those people, let's say, the woo-woo crowd, which I've been accused of being in the woo-woo crowd or spiritual crowd.
Sure.
Someone called them drifters. It's too negative. I'm trying to not deal,
Right.
I don't want to deal with this. And then they just take little snippets, wisps of information that often come from the mainstream that doesn't have any context, that doesn't have any substance, and then cling on to it rather than come to the determination that the people oftentimes are these leftists. They are these supposed liberals. And so another thing you had brought up Trump and people pooing on HCQ because he promoted it. So think about this. If Orange Man talks about Operation Warp Speed, there's more people waking up about vaccines thanks to Trump talking about Operation. So either way you cut it, it's a positive thing. And I've been part of this conversation with vaccines for a long time, many years. And now I see it's maybe I'm in an echo chamber, but we made the cover of Newsweek. They called us anti-vaxxers because we hijacked their hashtag Doctors Speak Up. And now, did you see the campaign where Fauci and other globalists, probably funded by Bill Gates, has given these celebrities are going to give up their platforms for a day to the experts? And so Julia Roberts and Shailene Woodley, whose grandmother who has been standing for natural remedies, how did they get to her? How much money are they giving these people to prostitute themselves? And then we're seeing a replay of, it's not We Are the World, it's One World, and we have Lady Gaga, and we have Madonna, and when Madonna was doing her little quarantine diaries, I actually tweeted and said, Madge, who's producing these? And literally 2 days later, she announces that she's working with Bill Gates.
Right. Yeah, it is phenomenal that a handful, when you look at the history of this and going back to Event 201, prior to that, we have the Rockefeller Foundation doing a lot of work towards planning pandemic response, but then we see Event 201, and it's Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum funding this planning, conveniently happening right before the actual pandemic, and then they follow the playbook. And so we're looking at organizations of oligarchs and billionaires that are clearly working behind the scenes, not through the democratic process, but behind the scenes in these public-private partnerships between their corporations and the government to implement policies that they've invented at their own think tanks that they've funded. It's a complete circumvention of the democratic process. It's just mind-blowing to see. And this is why it's so confusing to me that the people on the left are the ones that seem to be falling for it. The only thing that I can see is the connection between central planning economically, the concept of scientific socialism, and this belief in science. And then when they're told that science is telling them this or that about disease, it's kind of psychologically part of the package. Even though the science clearly dictates that the direction the authority figures are going in is not really, not the direction I would choose, certainly. Like, I'm reading the science saying, I don't want to be put on antivirals and then a ventilator if I got COVID. You know, I want to go on these other treatment protocols that seem to be working a lot better, where the
Yeah.
peer-reviewed papers have been showing they're working a lot better if they're following the protocols. I mean, one of the things that you said earlier about the methodologies of the science, we're seeing, you know, the protocols that are working are hydroxychloroquine with zinc, typically taken at the early stages of the infection. And then you see this slew of white papers that either they feed people an overdose of hydroxychloroquine and they die, and they go, see, look at how dangerous this is.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
Yeah.
why did you feed them an overdose? You just murdered those people. I mean, it's insane. Or they feed them hydroxychloroquine at the end stage when it's too late and then say, see, it doesn't work. It's just crazy to see how they manipulate the science, because obviously these studies were set up to fail, to show they're not following the protocols that are shown to work. Follow
Well,
those protocols and see how well they work, and then we can have a discussion.
so yeah, there was one I think that Zach found that they were using vitamin C instead of a placebo or something, like basically it was designed to fail from the get-go. And again, folks, this is a generic drug, and so they can't make money off of it. Whereas Gilead, that NIH and Fauci has his paws in, um, sorry, remdesivir,
Mm-hmm.
is being touted as a possible treatment, and of course, no going back to normal until 7 billion people are vaccinated, which is just outrageous. It's outrageous, and
Right.
yeah, it's very sad. I mean, I was speaking to my naturopath yesterday, and I went to her many years ago, and now arguably I hold more information than she does, and I go to her and I say I want to try this or I want to try that. Or so yesterday I was talking to her and she was rifling off the numbers in California, and I'm like, but the tests are wrong and people being bribed, and health officials, you can't trust the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
They're just being used to scare people. And I was puzzled that she didn't know, or that I knew more than her as far as where the truth is. And if you want to go on HCQ or Viral or Z-Pack, you should be able to do whatever you want with your body, but you should also be given all the information so that you can make an informed choice. And
Right.
from a psychological point of view, when you have these social media platforms like Google that are no longer offering organic searches and only offering auto suggestions, which is a mind control tool, then your perception is being impacted. You don't have the full picture. You're being fed. And I would like for people to wake up and realize what an amazing species we are and how we have been dumbed down. Literally, there are studies that show that our cue points have been robbed because of all the poisons and their synergistic effects on
Mm-hmm.
the system.
Yeah, I mean, to continue with the psychological metaphor, it's like being in an abusive relationship and being gaslighted by the authorities and by the corporate media, where they're throwing out all of this information, especially with the COVID statistics. And it's like, if you're trying to think rationally about it, the numbers don't fall into place. It doesn't come together. I've been seeing the most bizarre mainstream media articles, like one about remdesivir where they did a study and it came back horribly. And you're looking at
Mm.
the study and it's like, oh, this stuff barely works. And the article says, it quotes the study, I'm looking at the statistics, like those statistics don't look very good to me. And then the rest of the article is just about how great it is. And it's like, how did you
Wow.
come to that conclusion based on those numbers? I've been finding the same thing. And I don't know where you stand with the antibody tests, because I know a lot of people are very skeptical of those as well. But from
I
what,
am.
right. I mean, from what I've seen, I think the antibody tests are better than the PCR tests for what that's worth. And that the information that we could glean would be helpful in terms of at least getting an estimate of how many people have been infected in the past. So I'm trying to see if where do we stand on the antibody tests? Can we get more antibody studies done just to at least glean whatever information may come from them? From the research that I've done, they seem to be 95% effective, most of them. But you'll read an article that says, these antibody tests are only 95% effective. And then there'll be a quote from one expert that's like, those numbers are horrible. I can't work with that. But then you look up the PCR tests, and there's no way to tell how accurate the PCR tests are. I read an article the other day that quoted the CDC website for their influenza PCR test, where it clearly says this PCR test is about 50 to 70% effective. And it was the same thing. I'm reading the article. It quotes the CDC in the middle of the article. This test may only be 50% effective, which is a worthless test, because if it's wrong half the time, then how do you know if it's right or wrong ever? And then it goes on to explain how great the PCR tests are. And it's just like, how can you write something that's so trashy where even your own sources, and you're writing it and you're using the source material, which clearly shows you how sketchy the PCR tests are, and you're just you're fabricating a narrative around your source material that's the exact opposite of what your own sources are saying. It's insane. I don't know.
Absolutely. I want to say something about, so the PCR test, we started with the CDC not wanting to use the WHO test. Then we found out that the CDC's test was contaminated with the coronavirus.
Right.
Then we opened up the floodgates for all these different labs. Okay, so initially there was one test, then I saw 6 tests, then I saw 13 tests. Now we're arguably at more than 45 PCR tests. What's the golden standard? This is not a diagnostic tool.
Right.
I have published ad nauseum images showing the limitations. Now let's go to the antibody test. I don't know how many antibody tests we are at now. When we first announced the first one during the press, or rather the COVID task force, they announced Celix. So I looked into Celix. Celix is owned by Avioq, A-V-I-O-Q. Avioq is owned by Shandong. So now we're in China.
Right.
Yay, we're in China. We're made in China, where we started with the FDA and we've devolved. So then Shandong creates a sea aquarium farming stuff. What does that have to do with this antibody test? Who is behind it? One CCP, I saw that the government was Chinese government was owning this. No one's really talked about this. Now we have, I don't know how many antibody tests, again, where it's the standard. And then we're telling people that you can get reinfected. So we're making the asymptomatic, which in the beginning I also was like, oh my goodness, this actually incubates for more than 14 days. And we need to shut down all the flights way earlier than Trump was saying. Because it's all in perspective, right? Maybe for Trump, he was early in the game comparatively to others. But there's others like Zach and I who February 9th, close all the flights, close all the flights, close all the flights. And now, like, if you're healthy and you feel okay, like when we first got to Costa Rica, Zach got really sick for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
He was sick. He could have gotten coronavirus or whatever strain. There's many strains. There's said to be many strains, and it mutates, because I'm not saying that there's no virus or it doesn't exist. I didn't get sick. You can, why? Is it because I'm not vibrating at that frequency of fear? Is it because I'm taking silver and I'm taking a vitamin C? But am I asymptomatic? Do I have antibodies now? Regardless, I don't want to get tested. I don't want your Bill Gates synthetic swab up my nostril, arguably taking my DNA. It doesn't make a difference, because I'm not going to follow your protocols, buddy. So it doesn't matter. If someone, my friend, him and his girlfriend went near Corona, California, to ironically get their coronavirus drive-through test. He grew up not taking any antibiotics, has a much stronger immune system than I, and he tested negatively. His girlfriend tested positively. But I personally would not want their swab up my nostril.
Right.
That's me.
Right. I mean, I get, interestingly, from my perspective, the research that I've done, I think the coronavirus has been around for a while longer. The Oxford study that came out initially around the same time as the Imperial study, everybody listens to the Imperial study that says millions of people are going to die. The Oxford study says, it looks like it's probably been around for a lot longer, and nobody's paying attention to that. But I have a...
Yeah. Sorry, I told that to Zach. I said that I think this has been around longer. And it's like, as far as an investigative journalist, you're supposed to rule out the implausibilities. And I do follow my hunches. And I am an intuitive person.
Right.
Everyone can develop that muscle. Now, I'll just have to preface it with saying, like, my hunch is that this has been around longer than they say it is. But we know that coronavirus, I mean, I have Fauci caught him on tape in 2017 talking about a novel coronavirus.
Right.
It's a family there's at least 6 different strains. It's been around for at least 40 years. So is this novel? Sorry,
Yeah,
so what were you going to say?
I know, it's so, it seems like they were expecting this, they were waiting for this, they planned for this, and then what do you know, it's happened. But I was discussing that the anecdotal evidence I have here in Northern California is that a lot of people were sick. And I know anecdotal evidence is not necessarily evidence, which is one of the reasons why I'd like to see the antibody tests here, to see, just at least get some idea of how many people may have had it, because a lot of people were sick here in December and January. And it was a weird flu bug that was going around, and a lot, it's just like what you hear in your community, which really, I mean, as much as we do research over the internet and we try to discover the best sources, the only real primary source that you have in your life is you and what you experience in your community. So, I think it is important to note that there was something that was going around here in December. A lot of people noticed it, and I'd like to be able to do some research into maybe that was coronavirus coming through here in my community a few months before the lockdown. And we don't have access to the antibody test now. The whole state is promoting the PCR tests. So my intuition...
What state are you?
In California.
Oh, you're in California.
Yeah,
okay.
Northern California.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, at least and it's a rural community here, but we don't have access to the antibody test at all. They've been pumping up the PCR test as much as possible in case of an outbreak, then they can contact trace it. But we actually conducted an informal poll. One of our county board of supervisors did. He polled 2,000 people, which our county has 90,000 people in it. So it's a fair segment for an informal poll. And 15% said they felt like they'd had the coronavirus previously. And again, so
what is that to you? What are the symptoms to you? And I say that because I noted that on the military site, they added strange symptoms like new confusion and inability to arouse and bluish lips,
right,
which is very bizarro.
It is interesting. My experience was, like, my wife got sick in December. She had a flu for about 3 or 4 days. She was probably stayed in bed. And her comment to me was, "This is a really strange flu. I've never had anything that felt like this before." And that, other than that, it seemed like a flu. I wasn't too worried about it. I mean, the whole coronavirus thing hadn't even started yet. It may have just barely been in the news. When she was sick, I don't think I'd even heard the term. So, but it was just enough that she commented that it was different. And then I did have one friend. This is an interesting story if I just tell my own stories here. But I had one friend, one of my neighbors, and I think she clearly had it, because she did end up having some of the blood clotting symptoms, the bluish, and then what was she talking about? Some vascular, like she could see some of her veins for a few days afterwards until they healed up or whatever. There was some vascular damage that was done, and the blue toe or whatever that they talk about. So it seems, again, this just reinforces the reasons why hydroxychloroquine works, because it seems to be causing this blood coagulation more than it is a pneumonia, which is why the ventilators don't work. But they won't. For some reason, the medical establishment doesn't seem to want to follow this evidence. But the interesting thing about my neighbor is she was sick right at the beginning of the lockdown. I mean, in my opinion, a prime candidate, if anyone was going to get a PCR test. They're all saying, oh, we don't have a lot of these tests, and we're only giving them to the sickest people. Well, my neighbor was sick for like 2 weeks. And in the second week, she went to the hospital and was like, can I get a PCR test done? And they said, no, we're not. They were only giving them to people, I guess, who were hospitalized. And I don't think we had one hospitalized case in Mendocino in my county. So it was just a strange thing. And this, again, just going back to my typical personal philosophy that, the best evidence for my life choices is the evidence I see around me in my community. And then, like, the computer is a secondary source of information where I look up stuff online because, you don't know how good that source is on that, whatever, from that website or this website. Or, I mean, I try to do my best, but...
well, like this, it's an infodemic. There's so much,
right.
There's so much information. Some people are saying that this is more of a blood. This is more serology in the blood. I haven't done a lot of research into that. If someone has an altitude sickness, we are the sickest society, America. Not to say that others aren't. 1 in every 2 people has a chronic illness. I believe that because of the crap food, where is Hippocrates? He's rolling around in his grave.
Right.
That we have paved the way to a perfect cytokine storm. That because people do not look at details, it's an individual basis, and we have to look at their pre-existing conditions. We have to look at, like, even with your friend, are they vaccinated? Why is the largest population that's infected the ones in the military?
Sure.
We know, what do we know about them for sure is that they're forced vaccinated.
Right.
So that's worth noting. Believe prisoners are forced vaccinated. I'm not sure. Nursing homes, I'm sure they're pumped with the flu vaccine.
Right.
And the last time I got sick was four and a half years ago, and it was really bad flu. And wow, what a doozy! And I remember people were like, "Are you Jehovah's Witness? Go and get the Z-Pack." And
Right.
I'm like, "F the Z-Pack. I'm not taking the Z-Pack. I've worked so hard to stay off of antibiotics for almost a decade. I'm going to take my silver. It's going to take a little bit longer." And I got better.
Right.
And if it were to happen again, then I definitely would not take I would go the natural route and hope that it's not a crime.
Yeah, I guess it's been about 2 hours. Do you have any final statements, or, right? We just rocked it out. Let people know where they can find out more about your stuff and catch the movie.
Yeah. Vanishing of the Bees is, like I said earlier, on iTunes and Hulu and Amazon Prime. And me, you can buzz on over to honeycolony.com. You can buzz on over to simplytransformative.com, because we also offer an organic, liposomal, amazing CBD with Chinese herbs. And, I have a meager YouTube channel. And I guess I report for Twitter.
Right.
Because I'm putting so much information in real time. Like, as I'm researching, I'm like constantly just sharing. And yeah, I've been covering this coronavirus crisis since the beginning of January. We did a man on the street on January 16th. I called it, "Is this the virus that didn't cry wolf?" Oh boy, whether it's real or not, this is the virus that didn't cry wolf. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Marayam Henien. I'm assuming you'll put the handle.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and also people can send me an email if they're interested in functional medicine or consultation. It's Marayam, Maryam at honey HONEY colony COLONY.com.
Great. I definitely highly recommend the movie, and I would check out honeycolony.com as well. And the stuff that Marayam is writing right now is right on topic with the coronavirus stuff. And so definitely really appreciate her work.
Thank you, Doug.
If you like what you're hearing, you can check me out at www.theshiftnow.com. You'll get the full 2-hour interview if you subscribe for $6 a month. I'm also on Patreon at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and you can check me out on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, or my Twitter handle is at @dmckenty. So hope to see you there, and we will continue marching forward through this pandemic and continue trying to get the word out so maybe people can be less afraid and a little bit more healthy with their lifestyles. All right. Thanks again, Marayam.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye.
And there you have it, people. Another excellent interview in the can with Marayam Henien. What an excellent conversation that I just had with her, really diving deep into the relationships between what's going on with the honeybees, what's going on with nature in terms of rising toxicity levels, pesticide use, etc., and what's happening in terms of our human nation, our worldwide nation that's being more and more affected each day by these pesticides that are slowly causing the same problems. Hopefully we'll be able to avoid what's happening to the bees in terms of total collapse. I think more and more we're starting to see these control mechanisms put in place, apparently coming from the higher levels of our society, this billionaire class. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum making these plans, the Rockefeller Foundation, and then rolling out these plans over these extended periods of time. More and more, we're just seeing this, and I think trying to get more of this information out there, the more prepared we can be for what's going on, and the more organized, perhaps, we can get to try to prevent this, maybe turn the tide, or at least start having more open conversations about the importance of individual sovereignty and individuals being able to make choices for themselves. So I hope that you all enjoyed this interview, and if you did, I want you to think about going to my website, www.theshiftnow.com, and becoming a member. You can hit the subscribe button for $6 a month. You'll get the full feature-length interview where Marayam and I really went deeper into this metaphor, more than a metaphor, between the bees and the bee colonies and the disease spread that's happening throughout the world right now, and this impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what the people on the tops of our society seem to be pushing us towards in terms of their solution. Maybe we can come up with other solutions and stop this kind of imposition from above. I think part of making the shift is trying to form a society based on working from the bottom up. So if you want to help, the other thing that you'll get with your membership is access to the membership forum. I think this has a real opportunity to grow into something very cool, a resource that we could all use in terms of getting our heads together, talking about different issues, sharing research and source material, and of course you would be directly involved with me in production of the show. So if you're interested in helping me figure out discussion topics, important events, and people to interview, then please think about subscribing for that $6 a month payment, and that'll help me be able to dedicate more of my time to this project and allow you access to participate in it as well. So I would thank you for your support. Also, you can go to my Patreon page. That's The Shift with Doug McKenty on Patreon. And I hope to see you all there. Please think about supporting the program. These are the early days, and I can use all the help I can get. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on the flip side. Take care.